thank you all very much for coming out this morning.
I love you!
Are you guys ready to make American history? I'm glad you are, because this election is the most important midterm election in the modern history of the United States. And this election nationally will determine in a very significant way not only what happens to your lives, but what happens to your children's lives and your grandchildren's lives. And here in Florida, the choice could not be clearer. We have a candidate in Mayor Gillum who is finally prepared in this state to make government work for all of the people, not just a handful of special interests. Now I want to say a special word to the young people. And I want to explain how we end up in Washington and in Florida and in many states around the country with governments that ignore the needs of working people and the elderly and the children and the sick and the poor, but work overtime to give tax breaks to billionaires. How does it happen that in Washington we have a Congress that gave $1 trillion in tax breaks to the top 1%, but then wants to come back and cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, education, and nutrition programs? How does that happen? Is that what the American people want? No. But it happens. And I'll tell you exactly why it happens. It happens because as a nation, we have one of the lowest voter turnout rates of any major country on earth. And in 2014, when your current governor was elected, when Republicans took over the House and the Senate, we as a nation had the lowest voter turnout since World War II. And when the voter turnout was low in 2014, it meant that a lot of working people didn't vote, people of color didn't vote, lower income people didn't vote. And the group that voted in the worst way, in the lowest voter turnout, was young people. That's a fact. So let me be very blunt with the young people of Florida. I know that football is important. I got it. And I come from New England, and we're all very proud the Red Sox won the World Series. All right, got that too. But let me humbly suggest to you that the future of American democracy, that your future as Americans is almost as important as Thursday night football. And let me suggest this as well. I've been all over this country recently and in the last several years. I happen to believe that the younger generation of America today is the most progressive generation in the history of America. You should be proud that you are leading our country in opposition to racism, in opposition to sexism, in opposition to homophobia, in opposition to religious bigotry. And unlike the President of the United States, you know that climate change is real and that we got to transform our energy system. You are a great and wonderful generation. But let me be again very blunt with you. Your ideas about economic justice and social justice and environmental justice and racial justice, they don't mean anything unless you participate in the political process, unless you come out to vote. And here and in fact all over this country, if the generation of 30 years of age and younger came out and voted at the same level as the general population, we would transform the United States of America. So what I am asking of you, what I am begging you to do, is not only come out to vote, and by the way, if you haven't voted early yet, we're going to be marching to the polling place on campus after this event. We'd love you to join us. Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith will be leading that. But more importantly than just you voting, you need to reach out to your friends and your family members and your co-workers and explain to them how important this election is. Now, just before we came here, I was talking to a young woman at the hotel where we stayed last night. And I said, just out of curiosity, can you tell me, how much money you make? She says, well, I make $10.10 an hour, and I have no health care benefits. All over this country and in Florida, there are tens of millions of people working at starvation wages, and we have 30 million Americans, including many right here in Florida, who have no health insurance or are underinsured with high deductibles and high copayments. So you tell your friends, when they ask you why the election is important, tell them that Andrew Gillum believes that if you work 40 hours a week, you should not be living in poverty, and we're going to raise that minimum wage to $15 an hour is not a whole lot, but at least it will give people a shot at living with some security and some dignity. And by the way, when we talk about fair wages, what Mayor Gillum and I understand is that we must end the absurdity of women in this country making 80 cents on the dollar compared to men. And Andrew also understands, as most of you and I understand, that it must be a woman who controls her own body, not the government. Andrew understands, as does Chris King and Sean Shaw, that your generation is the future of America, and that we will not be successful in the future of our country unless we have the best educated workforce and population in the world. And that is why in Washington I am going to be working, and Andrew in his own way as a governor will be working, to move us to making public colleges and universities tuition free. Now, how many of you are going to leave school in debt? Well, I have talked to not only young people, middle-aged people, older people, all across this country, who are dealing with debts of $50,000, $100,000, met a dentist in Iowa, $400,000 in debt. You should not have to sacrifice your financial future because you're trying to get a decent education. We're going to lower student debt as well. Now, people say, and I've been criticized for this, well, Bernie, that's nice, but how are you going to pay for it? Well, I will tell you how, and this is an important point that I also want all of you to know. Please never forget that, thank God, you are not living in an impoverished, poor country. You are living in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. But there is something profoundly wrong about the nature of our economy when we have 3 of the wealthiest people owning more wealth than the bottom half of America. When the top 0.1% owns more wealth than the bottom 90% of the American people. When 40% of all new income goes to the top 1%. So when people say, well, how are you going to pay for making public colleges and universities tuition free? Well, we all remember that Trump and the Republican leadership gave $1 trillion in tax breaks to the top 1%. Well, I've got a better idea for $1 trillion, and that is to make public colleges and universities tuition free. And to reduce student debt. Now, this young woman that I talked to this morning, she said she has no health insurance. I want all of you again to understand something that I think many Americans don't. We are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a right, not a privilege. Health care for all is not a radical idea. In Burlington, Vermont, I live 40 miles away from the Canadian border. They provide health care to all. UK, Germany, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, every country in Europe guarantees health care to all. If every other major country on earth can guarantee health care to all, we can do it in the United States of America. Once again, people are saying, well, it's a great idea. How are you going to pay for it? Please understand, we spend twice as much per capita on health care as do the people of any other country. But in America, a lot of that money is going to pharmaceutical industry profits and insurance company profits and outrageous compensation packages for the executives in the insurance and drug industry. So we believe that you should spend health care dollars to provide quality care for all, not making the drug companies and the insurance companies rich. And brothers and sisters, let me tell you what Donald Trump will not tell you. And that is that climate change is real. Climate change is caused by human activity. Climate change is already, as you know, doing devastating harm here in Florida, all over our country, and all over the world. And as some of you may have read a couple of weeks ago, a 700-page report came out from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And I don't want to get you too nervous, but this is what it said. It said that we have all of 12 years, that is not a long period of time, to significantly cut carbon emissions and transform our energy system. And if we do not move boldly in those 12 years, the planet that we will be leaving to our children and grandchildren will be increasingly unhealthy and increasingly uninhabited. And when I come to the state of Florida and I see all of that beautiful sunshine, this state should be one of the leaders in the country in moving to sustainable energy. Andrew Gillum understands that we have in this state and country a criminal justice system that is broken and that needs major reform. Andrew understands that there's something profoundly wrong. And you should appreciate how wrong it is. We have more people in jail in America today, disproportionately African American, Latino, and Native American. More people in jail than any other major country on earth. And what Andrew understands and I understand, that it makes a lot more sense for us to be investing in jobs and education for our young people rather than jails and incarceration. We have a president of the United States who is doing something, well, doing many things, that are different than any other president in history, whether they have been conservative or liberal or progressive or whatever. Every president in recent history understands that when you get to the Oval Office and when you're president of the United States, your job is to bring people together. To bring them together, whether they're black, or they're white, or they're Latino, or they're Native American, or they're Asian American. Whether they are male or female, gay or straight. We are one nation, and our president should be bringing our people together. And yet we have a president today who is trying to win cheap political points, trying to gain votes, by dividing us up, by trying to get one group to hate another group. All of you know that as Americans, we are very, very proud of many parts of our history. We have led the world in so many ways. But we also understand that there are parts of our history that we are not proud of. We're not proud of what the settlers did when they first came to this country to the Native American people. We are not proud of the abomination of slavery and racism and segregation. We are not proud that 100 years ago in America, women were third-class citizens, did not have the right to vote, did not have the right to go to great colleges like this, could not go out and get the jobs they wanted 100 years ago. We are not proud that our gay brothers and sisters had to hide their sexuality. We are not proud that for hundreds of years, people, whether they were Asian, whether they were Catholic, whether they were Jewish, whether they were Italian, Irish, you name it, were discriminated against. But we also know in our history that throughout that period of time, incredibly brave people put their lives on the line and sometimes died, and got up and said, racism is wrong. Sexism is wrong. Religious bigotry is wrong. Homophobia is wrong. Xenophobia is wrong. And that's what those heroes and heroines did. They worked overtime to create a nation in which we share our common humanity. In this room, there are people whose families have come from probably dozens and dozens of different countries. But here in America, we are proud to be Americans. We are one people. And I say to Donald Trump that this country has struggled with discrimination of all forms for so many years. And for too many years, brave people have stood up and fought back. And we say to Trump today, we are not going backwards into more discrimination. We are going forward to celebrate our diversity. All over this country, there is now a very hard-fought election. I just returned from a 9-state visit where I work with candidates who are running for Congress, running for the United States Senate. We're going to do everything we can to end one-party rule in Washington. But while we do that, we know that we need strong and progressive governors to stand up for their working people, to take on powerful special interests, to focus on education, on health care, on the environment. And you have a candidate here who is as strong and as progressive as any gubernatorial candidate in America. Now, there is a reason why Trump will be here, I gather. Tonight is coming?
No!
Tonight. Because he is nervous that his candidate may lose. And your job is to make Mr. Trump very, very nervous. Your job is to elect Andrew Gillum. Your job is to have the highest voter turnout for a midterm election in Florida history. And your job with your generation is to understand that when we stand together, when we have the courage to take on the greed of the billionaire class, there is nothing that we cannot accomplish. Let's go out and get them. Let's win this man.